Good evening. My name is Tony David. I'm the Vice Dean for Psychiatry, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here to the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience, King's College, for Nicola Fear's inaugural lecture. The format is that I will make an introduction, she will give her lecture, and then Professor Simon Wesley will do a vote of thanks, and then you're all warmly invited to a reception in the Education Hub, which is just a bit further on from where you came in. So just by way of a brief introduction, Nicola qualified in King's College in pharmacology, it seems, but she saw the light and worked in epidemiology, got a master's, and then did her DPhil in Oxford and worked in physical health and cancer as an epidemiologist. She then got in touch or made her first contact with the military through the Defence Analytic Services Agency, DASA, and worked on military health. And I guess it was through that that she came into contact with some people who were beginning to study the health of our armed forces, going through the different conflicts that unfortunately we seem to see one upon another, and became a key member of the team in the Academic Centre for Defence Mental Health. So was a senior lecturer and then a reader, and then in 2014 was promoted to professor, and she's been director of the centre since 2011. So Nicola has many important publications to her name, nearly 200, and I've picked out a few just to show the importance and diversity of her work. First of all, you could say that her work is in the field of occupational health, which isn't always the most glamorous area until it's your occupation that's being considered, or an occupation as important and as dramatic as the military. But in our own occupation, one of her first papers was on the mortality of doctors in different specialties. It was based on 20,000 NHS doctors. And of course, my eye soon landed on psychiatrists, and it turns out that we've got higher mortality rates than other consultants in ischemic heart disease, injury and poisoning, whereas anaesthetists have more cirrhosis and melanoma. So I guess it's all that sun and sangria that gets to them in the end. Another great title for a paper was 50 Ways to Trace Your Veteran, which I suspect so there were some other minds that went into that. Brilliantly amusing but important paper on the importance of tracing cohorts in epidemiology. Another paper that caught my mind has the title of It's Good to Share, or Is It Good to Share? Intergenerational Transmission of Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. And she and Simon Wesley write about the fact that we get lots of things from our parents, our genes for one thing, as well as our beliefs, our attitudes, and sometimes our worries and concerns. And it's such a pleasure to see so many of Nicola's family here from generations above and below to show that it is good to share knowledge and pride, as well as some of the more difficult things in life. But moving on, it would be very wrong to mistake this diminutive figure as not being a very formidable person. Not only is her favourite television programme The World's Strongest Man, and she revealed to me that she's the coach for the under-10s undergraduate rugby team for which her son plays. But to mix with the military, you need to be strong, and she definitely is not out of place there. She has all the qualities that you would associate with these great organizations. Leadership, teamwork, and perhaps what we're going to see in the coming minutes and hours grace under fire. So with that, my great pleasure to welcome Nicola Fear for her inaugural lecture.
Thank you, Tony, for those kind words. You've actually stolen some of my slides from me, so so it will be a lot shorter than originally planned. But thank you all for coming today. It's so lovely and a little bit scary to see so many of you here to be part of my inaugural lecture. When I was thinking about what to say or what not to say, Mary and Max, my two children, said, "Mummy, don't be too academic, it's so boring." So, okay, try not to be too boring, and don't do any jokes, because you're terrible at jokes. So, this could be a very short, slick presentation. So, Tony's talked a little bit about my career to date, and really that's what I want to talk about in more detail this evening with you all. There will be a little bit of academia in there, but hopefully it will be a bit more light-hearted. So really, this evening I'm going to talk about how did I get from being that cute little baby with loo brush hair to being a professor of epidemiology, and the hat is trying to hide the loo brush hair. You've obviously all got a part to play in that, and I will obviously talk about some of you and how you've helped me along the way as we go through. But where does it all start? Well, this is really where it starts. This is where my dad and my mum got married. So we've got the Fear family on the left-hand side and the Townsends on the right. And for those of you that have always wondered, what's that T? Why is she Nicola T. Fear? I'm a Townsend. So that's my, so I've carried the Townsend with me kind of all the way from the moment I was born. And so really that's, family, and Tony talked about that kind of sharing of that intergenerational pride is, I'm proud to be a Fear, I'm proud to be a Townsend, and, I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go through the family. So, had a pretty normal childhood, spent the first 12 years of life growing up in Dunstable in Bedfordshire. This is me in my brown uniform. That's the closest I ever got to joining an organisation where you need to wear a uniform. And as you can see, I'm not wearing it that well, which is clearly why a military career is not for me. But at the age of 12, we moved to the Isle of Wight because of my dad's work. And, for me, the Isle of Wight is still home. That is kind of where I spent the probably formative years of my life. This is Sandown High School, where I studied for my O and A levels. I'm showing my age now when I say I did O levels. There were three teachers that kind of influenced what happened to me next. And the three subjects I did at A level: maths, physics and chemistry. My physics teacher very much believed physics was for boys. So there were two girls, and myself and my friend Ruth, we did physics. Basically, we were ignored throughout the lesson. That kind of made me think, if I ever go on to teach, I want to be inclusive. I want to talk to everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a girl or a boy. Everyone deserves to receive the same level of education. My maths teacher was brilliant. She kind of inspired in me, the joy of maths, the joy of numbers, and, encouraged us to succeed. My chemistry teacher really thought I was a bad egg. I was not very academic. I had no hope of ever going to university. And if I was going to go to university, I definitely shouldn't study a science subject. I love to prove people wrong. And she inspired me, really, because, as Tony said, I came to King's. and I studied pharmacology. Why King's? Well, one, it was one of the, well, it still is, one of the top universities. But the main thing was they had the nicest prospectus. They had pictures of people in ball dresses drinking champagne. I want to go there. And so that, that was my kind of key choice. Why pharmacology? Everyone does drugs at university, don't they? So it seemed an obvious career choice. My degree was 4 years long. I worked for a year in industry, and during that time it became apparent that pharmacology wasn't really for me. Every time we had to do some kind of experiment or dissection, I generally ended up on the floor having passed out at the sight or the smell of blood. So clearly, it was a great experience, but pharmacology wasn't for me. I should point out at this point, that I was the first person in the Fears and the Townsends to go to university. So it was quite a big step. I remember my grandparents confused about I didn't need a uniform, and why didn't my dad get an end of year report on my attendance and my exam results. So it was quite a novel experience for all of us to go through. But when I finished, I went back to the Isle of Wight. I thought, now I can bask in the glory of being the only person in our family with a degree. My dad had other ideas. I haven't spent all this money on your education for you to work in a pub. You need to get a proper job. So I ended up as a researcher for the Isle of Wight Health Authority, as it was known at the time, in their Department of Public Health. And, again, I loved it. It was the maths, the numbers, the statistics that I became really interested in. What do they mean, and what do they mean for our population? And whilst I was there, I got the opportunity to attend a week-long course at Southampton run by Professor Barker. It was a great experience, very intensive course, and at the end of the week I said, I want to know more. How can I know more? And his suggestion was, you need to do an MSc. You need to go to the London School, and you need to do an MSc in epidemiology. So, what did I do? I went to the London School, did my MSc in epidemiology, and again, the stats, the epi, I just, I loved it. I kind of lapped it up and wanted to know more. And it's probably one of the best years of my life. When you do a master's, you've obviously got to do a dissertation. And for my dissertation, I worked on a European collaborative study of inflammatory bowel disease with Lucy Carpenter. Lucy was working on this project and needed someone to do some of the data analysis, so I sort of readily took that opportunity. So it resulted in an academic publication, which is great. It also gave me insight into what it's like to work on a collaborative project. There are some challenges, but there are also some bonuses. The final collaborator meeting was in Florence. That part of it I really enjoyed. But I also got to know Pat Doyle. Pat was one of the tutors on our course, and I would often turn up in her office. Juliet, her administrator, would be making me a cup of tea, and Nicola's in tears again. And Pat advised me that if I wanted to have a career in epidemiology, then really I needed to get a doctor in front of my name. It wasn't going to work if I wasn't a doctor. So I thought, right, okay, that's the next challenge. And I went to Oxford University to work with Eve Roman within the cancer epidemiology unit there. And my second supervisor was Jill Reeves, the picture in the middle, and the unit was led by Valerie Burrell. So, it was a great unit. There was lots of inspirational people that were based there, one of whom was Richard Dole. And, although he had retired by the time I was there, he would often pop in to check his post, have a chat. And, that got me kind of thinking about the work that he did. And I read a number of his papers that were looking at occupation and how what you do for a job influences your health and well-being, and is also associated with, what you may die from. And so, whilst I was at Oxford, I got the opportunity to work with Lucy and Eve, looking at cancer registration data and how, and on cancer registration data, it records occupation. So what you do and what you may be exposed to through what you do, how that is associated with cancer. And as Tony's already alluded to, we also looked at mortality data. This was with Lucy from a cohort of 20,000 hospital consultants. And he's also stolen, my next slide about, I thought, for this audience to hear a little bit more about psychiatrists, and, that they have got higher rates of death. I think colon cancer was in there as well, so, yeah. But clearly, this was a side project. I didn't go, this wasn't part of my doctorate whilst I was at Oxford. As Simon will probably agree with, I sometimes get a bit sidetracked with other projects. But really what I was there for was to look at paternal occupation and childhood cancer. And this was, excuse me, using routinely collected death certification data. So when a child unfortunately dies, obviously their cause of death is registered along with the occupation of their father. And I was able to get access to tens of thousands of death certificates to look to see was there any association between what your dad does or did and the types of cancer children were dying from. And it was this work for which I got my DPhil. And, yes, there are certain occupational groups where there are increased risks of cancer in their children. And we had a number of papers published from my thesis to support that. Cool. So I finished my DPhil, by which point Eve had left Oxford and gone to work in Leeds. And, like a dutiful PhD student, I followed her when I'd finished up to Leeds. And I was able to continue my interest in looking at occupation and how that was associated with childhood cancer using data from the UK Childhood Cancer Study. And, Leeds is basically the furthest north I've ever been. And so I struggled a little bit as a southerner, but I made two very close friends from there, Alex and Debs, who helped me navigate the northern landscape, the northern language, and continue to act as my interpreters when I sometimes get a bit confused. And, I spent a good couple of years, happy years, up in Leeds. And then, actually, yes, this was, I forgot this bit. I was jumping ahead. But as usual, I hadn't gone to Leeds to to continue my interest in childhood cancer. Occupation and childhood cancer. I'd gone there to work on a Department of Health funded study to look at the association between intramuscular vitamin K, which is given to children at the time of birth, and to see if there was any association with childhood leukemia. And this concern had arisen because of a study that had been conducted in the early 1990s, which had shown potentially an association. So there was a lot of concern. Are we giving children intramuscular vitamin K that could be causing childhood leukemia? So Eve, myself and other colleagues did several pieces of work in this, and basically we concluded that there was no evidence that neonatal vitamin K, irrespective of the route by which it was administered, was associated with children developing leukemia or any other cancer. And even now, when you look, a few years since I had Mary and Max, but even now vitamin K is still offered to all newborn babies. And this really made me realise that, you know, it's important to have impact and the importance of evidence. And that's something that I kind of have been striving for going forward. But whilst I was at Leeds, now I've got to the bit, I went to a wedding in France with my brother, who's this one on this end, and I met Dan, who's the second one in from the other end. And Dan at that point lived and worked in Cheltenham, and obviously I lived and worked in Leeds. And even though my geography is pretty bad, I know that they're not that close together. So I looked for another job. I would love to say that I was desperate to go and work at the MOD, but basically it was the first job I got that was closer to Cheltenham than Leeds was. And I worked in this building in the middle, Ensley, and that's based in Bath, or was based in Bath. It might have been knocked down now, I suppose. Yeah, it has been knocked down. So I left academia to become a civil servant. Lots of things happened whilst I was at MOD. One of them was I met and worked with Mr. B. Nick used to work, was in the Gulf Veterans Illnesses Unit when I first started at MOD, and then he moved to work for DASA, where I was based, and he became my boss. I'd say we had some interesting discussions at times, but Nick taught me the importance of consistency, for checking details and to making sure things are perfect before you distribute them to a wider audience. If you do it too early, you're likely to be shouted down, and you end up in all kinds of trouble. And I still kind of hold those values close today. I also worked on the first report that the MOD had ever made publicly available on the prevalence of suicide, or the incidence of suicide, in UK Armed Forces personnel. And this arose because there was a concern following a number of suicides at Deep Cut, which is a recruit training base in Surrey. But the MOD didn't have any context, so they didn't know if they were seeing more suicides than they expected, the same or fewer. So I worked to make sure the data was accurate, and then to run some analyses to look to see, well, what are the rates of suicide and how do they compare to the general population. And, you know, this kind of holds true now. You know, the rates of suicide in Armed Forces personnel are lower than comparable males in the general population, with this exception in young Army males, where there are more suicides than expected. And these reports have been published ever since, on an annual basis. And I had a look at the one that was published at the end of March, and it was I was pleased, but equally frightened to say that they're still using exactly the same templates that I developed way back in 2002, 2003. So hopefully I did it right. The Iraq War happened whilst I was working at MOD. I wasn't responsible. But this kind of taught me about kind of epidemiology at a really quick pace. I come from an academic environment where, you know, things take 3 years. We never do anything quick. We like to do a pilot study and have a chat, take it to ethics, revise it. Whereas we were getting phone calls saying, the troops are deploying tomorrow. What questions do we need to ask? And we need an answer by 11 o'clock. So although that was quite stressful, actually it kind of really made you put your skills to the test and to act quickly and hopefully effectively. Also coinciding with the end of the main kind of war phase of the Iraq War, Dan and I got married. So either I remember the end of the Iraq War because of when we got married, or the other way around. And you know, I know Dan's got a view on which one I remember and why. And then I also met Simon. Simon was based here, and he was just starting the first phase of our KCMHR cohort study, and we had a number of meetings at MOD about what the control group or comparison group should be, how should they be selected, etc. And Simon then one day sent me an email and said, I'm looking for an epidemiologist. Do you know anyone? Like, well, me? So at 38 weeks pregnant, I left the MOD and moved to King's, and Mary, that's you. So people at MOD thought I was completely mad. Why would you leave a job that had a permanent contract to come and work at a university on a 3-year contract where you were always having to fight for money? But, you know, pregnancy does do crazy things to your mind. That's, you know, that's all I can say. But, you know, since I've been at King's, it has been an incredibly productive time. Had another baby, Mr. Max, that's you. You know, became, as Tony said, a reader and then a chair, and also co-director of the King's Centre for Military Health Research alongside Simon Wesley. But academically, since I've been here, I've had over 170 papers published, lots of media exposure, and I've given evidence in front of the House of Commons Defence Committee 3 times. The first time, it was safe to say I didn't say a word. I was absolutely petrified. But I think by the 3rd time, I'd got the hang of speaking. But yeah, quite a terrifying experience. But you know, the reason that I've had so many papers published and the media exposure and being asked to give evidence is really because of the work that we've done with our cohort study. And I like to have a bit of a geeky number slide in any presentation that I give. And this cohort study started at the point that the Iraq War began back in 2003. We have now got 3 phases of data collection. In our latest phase here, which was conducted 2014 to 2016, we've got data from over 8,000 service personnel. So we've got lots and lots of data that underpins all of those academic publications that I mentioned earlier. Now, we could do a whole seminar series on the findings from those papers, but I just wanted to kind of just touch on 2 kind of key findings. One, that the rates of PTSD are around about 6% in general. It does vary depending on your role on deployment and whether you've left service or not. And the rates of alcohol misuse excuse me, are prevalent within the armed forces community. And they are decreasing, but they're still substantially raised when you compare them to what we would expect within the general population. Also, being at King's has enabled me to make lots of new collaborations and friendships. I just wanted to mention Christopher Dandiker, who was one of the co-directors here when I started. Christopher's a military sociologist. I knew nothing about military sociology. I knew nothing about qualitative research when I started. And I think Christopher didn't know very much about epidemiology. So we had this kind of time when we learnt from each other. And I think by the time Christopher retired, we both kind of understood and valued each other's strengths and what each other of us could bring to the interpretation of data. I mean, he also introduced me to some weird and wonderful conferences in the US where they literally read their presentations line by line without any slides, and for me that feels quite alien. I like a comfort blanket of a PowerPoint. I also got to make a wonderful friend in Amy Iverson, So Amy and I established our cohort study of military families that we followed up once, and hopefully we can follow up again. It's important to say that this work, unlike our other cohort, main cohort, is funded by the US Department of Defense, and it's great to get money from the US. They've got a lot more money than we have. And for those of you that don't know, today the main paper was published. It had a very, very long gestation, but yes, that was published today in BJP, so it's quite exciting. It's kind of see if we get any interest in that. Also, working here, have made lots of international collaborations, and with lots of different organisations around the world. And I think international collaboration is great for a number of reasons. You can share ideas, findings, resources, expertise, and you can put the results from the UK in the context of that more international picture, which hopefully helps us interpret what's going on here. And you get to go to some amazing places. You also get to go to some strange places as well. And sometimes I come home and Dan will say, "What have you had to eat for the last 3 days?" And I'm like, "Bread." He's like, "Well, what?" I was like, "I didn't know what it was, so I wasn't going to eat it." So yes, but I would say 9 times out of 10, it's a great experience. Other highlights? Well, sitting next to Bill on the breakfast red sofa was definitely one of my highlights. And meeting Prince Harry not only once but twice was a highlight. The first time, the picture at the top, I do look like a lovesick puppy. But thankfully, by when we met him earlier this year, I'd kind of regained some composure and could speak. Now, I think one famous politician said, "I don't make predictions, I never have, and I never will." So obviously I'm not going to predict the future now. Well, maybe a little bit. But what does the future hold? Well, I think it's important that I, as one of the directors, ensure that KCMHR and ADMMH have a sustainable future. And that's through the development of our team and ensuring that we've got resources to support the work that we need to do. I think our families research is a real asset to our team, and we need and we should do more of it, so I'd like to develop that. And to continue to develop with our international and our national collaborators can only strengthen what we do. And the last point on here about, what can we translate to other occupational groups? The military actually do a lot to look at the health and well-being of their employees. Most other occupational groups don't do anything, or they do very little. So what can we learn from the work that we've done that may help and benefit other occupational groups? And that's something I think we could and should do more of. But what does the future hold on a personal level? Well, this is Mary and Max. Mary is planning to be a 3-day eventer. If not, she's going to be an equine vet, so that's quite good. Hopefully I can retire early and be looked after. Max is going to be an international rugby player, and if that fails, he's going to be the world's strongest man. So there we are, something for me to watch on TV. But maybe, these are some other occupational groups that I need to be paying some attention to in the future. So, what does it take to be an epidemiologist with the military in brackets? Well, I think you've got to be stubborn. Not that I am, but I think it would help. You've got to be determined. You've got to be motivated. And I know Simon hates this word, but you've got to be passionate about the subject that you're looking at. To work with the military, clean shoes always helps, hence why I often wear patent leather, because they're easier to keep clean. Neat hair, I generally fail on that, but then I only have to look at Simon and know that it's all right. Great colleagues definitely help. And I wouldn't be able to stand up here today without, all of you in the audience here to help and support me. There are too many of you to mention, but, Simon has afforded me lots of opportunities that I wouldn't have had anywhere else. So I am very grateful for what he's done, although at times he does drive me insane. But I probably drive him insane too. Also a fantastic family, and I'm so pleased that lots of them are here today to help and support me. You really have been there for me all the way through. There's been some rocky roads, and you've always been there to help me along the way, and I'm very grateful for that. No, this is a bit where I might cry, but I try not to. So there are lots of people that I need to thank. There are some people that can't be here today, particularly my brother. He lives on the other side of the world. Again, not because of me, I hope. But there are 3 people that I would love to have been here today to be part of this. My mum, my granddad, and my cousin. And although they may not have realised it, they really supported me and, believed in me and have helped me achieve what I have achieved. So I am very grateful for them and the support that they have given me. So before I do get emotional, this is not an individual effort. All of you have had a part to play in getting me to be not that baby with blue brush hair, but to be a Professor of Epidemiology. And thank you all for your time this evening.
Such a beautiful presentation. So now I'll call upon Simon Wesley to do the vote of thanks.
Right. I was going to say some really nice things about you, Nicola, actually. Until you made the joke about the hair. Had to start again then. So Nicola, as she said, I remember very well when you joined us. It was 2004, and you came from Defence Statistics. It was the start of the war in Iraq, and we were all certain that you only came because you thought you might be deployed or something like that, so you came over to join us. And of course, you stayed with us ever since, and it's been an absolutely wonderful time. You've risen from senior lecturer up to professor. You're co-director of the King's Centre for Military Health Research. Given that the other co is me, you're really basically director of the King's Centre for Military Health Research. And I think the theme of what you've been saying today is very much that, your career, and in particular the time you spent here, the last 14 years, is very much a team effort. And of course, the discipline you're in, epidemiology, and the work we do, that's absolutely true. But as Orwell said, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Actually, I have to say, Nick, on the subject of animals, I just added, you just at the end said you were looking forward to the fact you were going to be looked after in your old age by a vet. And I just wonder if you know what vets do. I'm not entirely sure that you do. And what happens when you get ill and a vet is around, it's really not a good idea in my experience. But perhaps it'll be different. Perhaps family ties will come out. That'll be good. But as I say, you are very much at the centre of what we've all done, the engine of the academic success, and indeed the other successes that the unit has become. And it has been a success. You mentioned the huge numbers of papers we produced. We've become a trusted source, trusted by media, military, charities, academics, and so on. We produced lots of citation classics, yours being the highest, in fact. 20% of the ref impact of this institution came from KCMHR. So you've looked at the impact of war, you've looked at military families, and need nice timing to get a paper out. As you said, it has taken a bit of a while, though. I don't remember when did it actually start? I can't remember. Anyway, but it's well worth it. You'll all be reading about it tomorrow. But lots more than that. By the way, that was the first study that you remember was funded by the Department of Defense, and you and Amy massively over-recruited, which had never happened before in the history of any grant-giving body. That had happened, so we got more from them. You were very much part of the key trial of post-deployment screening. Roberto over there, again, quite surprised the Americans. The Americans believe that post-deployment screening works, and therefore that's why they do it. It's all mandated, and it's all that you can't get away from it. And so they paid us to do a trial to prove that it worked. Unfortunately, it massively didn't. And when we presented this to their top guy, the Secretary of State for Veterans Affairs, I could hear him talking and saying, "Why the shit did we fund this?" And he said, "Sir, it wasn't us, sir, it was the Department of Defense." Said, "Why, idiots?" And you can hear all this. It's totally all by it all. Anyway, there we are. That's what we do in research. We've done stuff on help seeking, alcohol, overstretch, marriage, non-battle injury. You didn't mention the huge study of physical injury, which will keep you happy for the rest of your career, for the way it's going to go, I suspect, and all of these things. And so all of that shows that you are an incredible scholar, but you're much more than that. When I ask people how do they describe you, the word that comes over most often is kind. She's very kind, she's lovely, she's charming, she's very polite, which is true, except when you start talking about Southern Rail and you turn into a foul-mouthed whirling dervish, in my experience. She's very loyal to people, right from the start, and there are so many people here from the old days when we all started off. Great Nick Blatchley, I can see at the top, Chris Danlicker and many others. You're incredibly loyal to the team who are filling out the rows, and you're loyal to the new team and the new colleagues we made in recent years as well. It's wonderful to see our colleagues from ARU over here, see Ray from FIMT, Rick Widnall, who's the Commandant of the Royal College of Defence Medicine, was going to be here, cried out 10 minutes ago, and has been sent down to Salisbury, which is going to be bad news for someone. I don't know who, but clearly something we're going to hear about. So he would have been here elsewhere. Now, you're also a bit more than that. You also are a little shy, that's true, and self-deprecating. You've already mentioned the first time we did HCDC, as we call it, the House of Commons Defence Committee, when you did sit. It's absolutely true. Totally silent for two whole hours. And then last time we all did it together, you couldn't be shut up. You're quite right. I prefer the old Nicola, actually, in many ways. And I do remember at the start, you would freeze in front of a microphone, and now you're almost as big a media tart as Neil Greenberg is. So all of that, and you're also stubborn. You can be stubborn. We have a particular ordeal by fire, which is known as the NATO Working Group. Most of us have done one of these, and this is a peculiar form of torment in which 29 people from 29 nations that totally dislike each other get together, continue to dislike each other, argue, moan, do no work at all, and never produce anything whatsoever of any value. Except when Nicola is in charge. And then all of a sudden, we get reports, papers, even books, and so on. It's a shame you're not in charge of Brexit, actually. The negotiations have gone a lot better. She's also, as you've heard, very, very generous. Generous in many things, actually. I mean, alcohol has played a little bit of part in a few of the stories you've already told, and we know that you are partial to the occasional martini or the occasional glass of bubbly, particularly when supervising, which is one of the reasons why you're a very popular supervisor. I can't think why. When there's celebrations to be had, as there often are if they're supervised by you, out it all comes. As I say, you're generous to a fault. You spent much of what you were saying acknowledging the role others have played in your success, and again, showing your essential kindness to the people that you've met along the way. And as one of those other people, and on behalf of all the other people here in the room, I can confirm that that feeling is completely mutual. You are very clearly a wonderful family person, mother, daughter, and wife. You're a fantastic and loyal colleague. You're a brilliant scholar, fantastic scholar in what you do, now with a world reputation. But most of all, you're just a superb friend. We're all happy to have you. Congratulations on your inaugural. Congratulations on the last 14 years. We look forward to the next. And now, time for your favourite hobby, time for a drink. Thank you very much.
So thanks also to the organisers, Hannah Warren and Abigail, and please join us upstairs for the reception. Thank you.